my name is Iasmina and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk to you guys about 10 mistakes new writers make and how to avoid them. Now, it's quite common for new writers to jump straight into a project and not really do any kind of research on, what not to do and what you should do. I don't necessarily disagree with that. If you have a great idea and you feel like you want to write it, then just go ahead and write it. All of these mistakes you can definitely fix in revision. But just in case you're doing some of that research, here are 10 mistakes new writers make. Some of these mistakes are things that I've done myself or I have seen in other people's manuscripts that I have critiqued. So I have my coffee here. Let's get started. I hope you learned something from this video. Or at least recognize some of these mistakes that you made as a new writer and laugh along with me. The number one mistake I see new writers make is thinking they're done after they finish their first draft. I see this all the time, especially on forums where people post about, I just finished my first draft, how can I get it published? Who can I send it to? How can I make my $1 million because I just finished this first draft and this is brilliant. Now, I've said this before and I'll keep saying it because unless you are an experienced writer, unless you've already written a handful of books, your first draft will suck. There is no other real way around it. Writing is rewriting. Of course, as you gain more experience, your first drafts will be cleaner and cleaner. But especially as a new writer, thinking that you can just take that pile of trash and put it out there for people to read, it's really not smart and it makes you look bad, especially if you decide to self-publish and you slap on a cover made in paint and you just put that stuff out there on Amazon. That's not something that you want to do. You don't want people to read that and then associate that badness with your name, especially if you want to make this a career. You have to take some time away and revise and edit, revise and edit, revise and edit multiple times until your book is good enough. And of course you can do this yourself or you can hire some professionals to do it. If you're planning on getting an agent, you should still do all of this before you even think about querying that agent because they are not going to accept that pile of trash unless your name is J.K. Rowling. And honestly, maybe not even then. So if you just finish your first draft, print it out, stick it inside of a drawer, go do something else for a couple of weeks, then come back to it with a fresh mind and start revising. Mistake number 2 I see new writers make is have too many characters with similar names or names that start with the same initial. Sometimes we tend to gravitate towards, names beginning with A or E or S. But if you have a cast of characters and 2, 3, or God forbid more than that have similar names, you will confuse the heck out of your readers. Especially in the beginning pages, if you introduce character A whose name is Alex and then introduce character B whose name is Alice, don't do that. It is very confusing as a reader to see names beginning with the same letter on the page because most of the time we tend to skip names or words that we're very familiar with. So in the same vein that said is said to be invisible in dialogue, character names, once you're familiar with them, tend to disappear while you're reading the page. You tend to just skip over them. So if you have 2 or more characters starting with the same initial, that can get super confusing because you might skip over them and your brain might register, oh, this is actually Alex, when it's actually Alice. Very confusing. Don't do that. There are so many names you can choose from. Choose something else. The number 3 mistake, and something similar to the last one, is self-insert characters. So this is when the author writes him or herself as the main character of the book or names the main character in the book something very similar to the author name. This is a big red flag that you're a beginner author, so please don't do this. Don't insert yourself in your book. It's fine if you're a known voices writer and you're talking about some of your experiences dealing with, a heavy topic, but don't write about yourself. Don't make the character yourself. You can definitely have traits of yourself or of, different people put into your characters, but it becomes really obvious when the author is just writing about him or herself. This is something that a lot of fan fiction writers do, and this is something I've done when I was like 9 or 10 and I wrote my first book, which was actually Harry Potter fan fiction, and I self-inserted myself into the story. It is very natural when you first try and do something like this to, I'll put myself inside of this crazy situation. But if you want to make a career out of this and you don't want to just write fan fiction or silly little things about yourself, then don't self-insert yourself into your books. The number 4 mistake new writers make is the dreaded info dump. Now, this is something most people do when they first start off a book, especially if you're writing fantasy or science fiction or something with a lot of world building behind it, and you just start your book by dumping all of that lore onto the page. You can do a much better job by inserting bits and pieces of the lore as the story goes along. The reader is not reading your story for the lore necessarily, and it's awesome that you have all this lore, it's awesome that you have all this backstory to your main character, but we don't need to read about it straight away. Have it written somewhere else, you can write a whole document and go crazy on the info dumping, just don't put it into the story as prologue or chapter 1, but take important bits of that lore and insert it into the story at the right time. Trust the reader that we can put things together and get that information on our own without you having to write 10 pages of that. On a similar note are physical descriptions. So another thing that new writers make is start a book, or when they introduce a new character and they just start listing all of the physical characteristics or personality traits of that new character. As a reader, we don't need all of this information about this new character. It's fine if you list a couple of things when you first introduce a character, but put the character into the scene and the reader will figure these things out. You don't have to say that the character is funny. Make the character tell a joke. Hence, they're funny. The number 5 mistake new writers make is write all of the unnecessary actions. All of the mundane actions that we do on a day-to-day basis, like go to the bathroom, brush our teeth, eat breakfast. These don't really have a place in your story unless something crazy happens while the character is brushing their teeth. You know, unless the axe murderer comes into the bathroom and tries to kill the main character. We don't need to see the main character brushing their teeth. It's implied that they do these things, and unless something important to the plot happens in those moments, take them out. On a similar vein, it's small talk and dialogue. You know, when two characters talk and say, hey, what's up? I'm good. How are you? I'm good. How about you? The weather's nice. All the small talk that we do in our day-to-day life, we don't need that in a book. Unless it's done with a purpose, unless it's meant to be really funny, or unless it's two characters bickering, and that kind of small talk comes with a lot of conflict. Unless it's something like that, don't do it. Make the dialogue interesting. There's definitely a balance to strike with dialogue where you need to make it realistic enough, but you also need to make it interesting enough, and sometimes the line there is a bit blurry. This all comes naturally with practice. But just as a rule, take all of that small talk out of your subsequent drafts. Number 6 mistake is writing too many stage directions. Now, this is something I have been guilty of, and I had my critique partners first point this out. When two characters come into the room and they sit down at the table and you write, this character sat down at the table, took a cup of coffee in their hands, put their chin on their hand, and stared out the window. Now the second character sat down on the opposite side of the table and they leaned back on the chair and looked at the ceiling. Those are stage directions. In a book, these things are not necessary. The 7th mistake new writers make is the infamous show versus tell. The basic concept of this is you need to show actions instead of telling them. Instead of telling how your character feels, you need to show how the character is feeling through actions or through dialogue. And for the most part, I completely agree with this. It's always a lot more interesting to show rather than tell. But there are definitely circumstances in which it is preferable to tell instead of show. Again, the balance there is something that you kind of figure out through practice and through reading a lot. Also, as a quick recommendation, I'll make a separate videos about useful writing books, but just on this topic, I really recommend The Emotion Thesaurus by Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi. This is an awesome tool for exactly this kind of idea, showing versus telling. So it's basically a catalog of emotions. For example, you want to write that your character is amused, and you can find, I don't know if you can see, but it says amusement in here, and then it gives you a list of physical signs that show that a character is amused, such as a shiny or rosy face, or snorting, laughing, displaying a wide grin, things like that. And then it also gives you like internal sensations for amusement, so for example, a wheezy breath, or your body temperature rising up. Again, in a first draft, it's completely fine to tell instead of show, but as you revise, look at the scene, identify what the main emotion is, and then try to change that telling into showing using stuff like this, or just figuring it out for yourself. The 8th mistake new writers make is not having enough character motivation and conflict. This is also one of those things I've been guilty of myself, and I only realized it quite late on in the drafting process, that things can't just happen to your character, and they can't just go along with them for no reason. The character has to have some kind of motivations behind their actions. Even if the actions are external, they can't just go along with them. They have to have a reason why they choose to go along with them, and why they choose not to go along with some of them. So figure out that character motivation. That is really, really important, because otherwise we don't really have a reason to care about the character winning the competition or defeating the evil. Why are they trying to do this? In the same vein, first drafts tend to not have a lot of conflict. And again, that's one of the main reasons why we read stories. It's because we want to see what happens when two characters are set against each other, or two main opposing motivations are set against each other. You know, it can be two characters bickering, or it can be two countries being at war with one another. It can be an internal conflict, so the character wants something, but he knows it's not the right choice, and so he's conflicting inside of himself. The number 9 mistake new writers make is using action as dialogue tags. Writing dialogue has rules, and one of the most commonly broken rules is, so I'll put up an example on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about, but basically, when an action follows dialogue, you don't put a comma after dialogue. You don't use the action as a dialogue tag. You write that action as a separate sentence because it is a separate sentence. It should not be a part of the dialogue section. And I see this a lot in new writers, I see this a lot in manuscripts, but it's just one of those things that you kind of have to learn. And the last on my list, number 10 mistake new writers make is forgetting to foreshadow. So this is quite common when you're pantsing, or when you haven't really figured out all of the plot points of your novel, and you come up with a solution to a problem, and you just kind of go with it. When a solution to a problem comes out of nowhere, it can be really disorienting, and it can seem lazy writing. Battle is lost, but Gandalf shows up with an army with 3 eagles to save the day. That can work as long as it has been foreshadowed, but when you do something like that, you have to go back as you revise and put in those breadcrumbs. Try to not make it seem like it came out of nowhere. It shouldn't be obvious to the reader that that is foreshadowing, you know? But after they've read the book and they think back, oh, you know, that's why, because I remember in the beginning he said this, or this happened, and that made sense. So think about that, because that's really important. Things shouldn't just resolve on their own or out of nowhere. It has to have some kind of reason, so figure out that reason and then go back and plant those seeds. So there you have it, guys. Those are my top 10 mistakes new writers make. I have definitely been guilty of some of these, but this is how we progress, you know, we learn from these mistakes and we become better writers. So let me know down in the comments if you've made these mistakes before, or if it's something that you haven't thought about before, or just generally what you think about this. So I hope you learned something new today, and thanks so much for watching. Click subscribe if you haven't already. I make new videos every Monday. So yeah, see you next time.